Far in the frozen reaches of the North, in the year 1857, an expedition ship led by Captain Anderson pushed toward the North Pole. The vessel creaked under the crushing weight of the ice as the crew strained to keep it moving. One sailor shouted across the deck, asking what they were to do now that the ship was trapped. Captain Anderson barked back that they must press forward, they hadn't come all this way to turn back. That night, the stillness of the Arctic was shattered by a thunderous explosion somewhere beyond the ice field. Anderson and several men grabbed lanterns and rifles, pushing through the biting wind toward the noise. When they reached the site, the snow was splattered with blood and charred ice. One sailor knelt and shouted that he'd found someone alive.
I saw a man, and Mr. Nagro.
The survivor was barely clinging to life, a man with a mechanical limb, his face pale and drawn. When Anderson lifted the lantern closer, his expression changed. The survivor was none other than Victor Frankenstein. They carried him back to the ship and laid him in the infirmary. Before long, a deep, guttural growl rolled through the cold air. The men on deck froze. Something vast and terrible was moving across the ice. Then it appeared, a towering figure, its flesh scarred and torn, moving with unnatural speed and strength. Bullets tore through it, but it didn't stop. The creature healed before their eyes. Anderson ran below to fetch Victor, who awoke with terror in his eyes. On deck, the creature slammed into the hull, tearing through sailors as it demanded that they hand over Victor, one managing to blast it off its feet with a cannon. For a moment, silence fell. Then the monster stirred again, rising from the smoke. It pressed its enormous hands against the ship and began to shove. Another gunshot missed, striking the ice instead. And with a final roar, the creature plunged through the shattered ice into the black waters below. When calm finally returned, the ship's doctor tended to Victor, grinding herbs into a paste to ease his pain. Hours later, Victor stirred. "How many?" he asked hoarsely. "6 men," Anderson replied. "It will come back," he warned. When Anderson asked who could have made such a being, Victor whispered, "I did." Later, Victor sat propped against the wall, his expression hollow. He began to tell his tale. "My father gave me my name, Victor the Conqueror. He was a baron and a surgeon of great renown. He married my mother for her inheritance, not her heart. At dinner, I once watched him hand my mother a slab of raw meat as if to humiliate her. At night, young Victor would hear their muffled arguments through the walls. During one of Victor's lessons, when he failed to answer a question about the heart's chambers, his father struck him across the face. "You bear my name. Don't stain it with weakness," he told him coldly. Days later, as Victor played by his mother's side, she suddenly collapsed. Victor clung to her body, but his father pulled him away. Years passed. His younger brother, William, whom the family affectionately called Guillermo, grew into a bright, kind boy who loved nature. But Victor was consumed by grief and rage. He believed his father had let their mother die. When he finally confronted him, his father simply said, "No man conquers death." Victor's eyes burned with defiance. "Then I will," he declared. That vow became his obsession. By 1855, he had found his way to the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh. Standing before a disciplinary tribunal, a much younger Victor defended his thesis with manic conviction. Gasps filled the chamber as he unveiled his experiment. He attached electrodes, flipped a switch, and the body moved. Members of the board recoiled in horror. He was expelled that very day. Yet as he left the college, his ambition burned brighter than ever. Outside, a man was waiting for him, a well-dressed gentleman who introduced himself as Henrik Harlander. Days later, Harlander showed him strange models, mechanical forms fused with organic material, grotesque but mesmerizing. "The secret," he said, "lies in the heart." Victor disagreed. "The spine," he said firmly. "That's where life begins and ends." Not long after, Victor reunited with his brother William, now a gentleman of means, and met his fiancée, Lady Elizabeth, Harlander's niece. At dinner, William teased Victor about his failed thesis. Elizabeth laughed softly, not out of cruelty but disbelief. Weeks later, Victor traveled with William and Harlander to see the old tower Harlander had promised him. It stood isolated atop a cliff, dark against the stormy sky. Excitement replaced doubt as Victor walked through the dusty halls. I'll need containment cages, he said eagerly. Large ones. Copper conduits, lightning rods, specialized instruments. Harlander grinned. You'll have them all. At a public execution, he stood among the crowd, his expression unreadable. As the condemned man fell, Victor watched closely, studying the body's convulsions, the moment life fled. In the following days, Victor followed Lady Elizabeth to a church. Hidden behind the screen of the confessional, he listened in silence as she spoke softly. But that night they met again, face to face at a quiet restaurant. Over dinner, her anger melted into curiosity. I find beauty in the smallest things, she told him. As the weeks passed, the abandoned tower transformed into a cathedral of science. Victor worked tirelessly, inserting needles through spinal cords, chasing that one elusive spark that would bring life. His early experiments ended in failure. Despite Harlander's warnings, Victor spent more and more time with Elizabeth. But Harlander saw distraction as danger. You're forgetting why you came here, he said sharply. Focus, Victor. Love is a weakness. That night, Victor lowered himself into a bath to clear his thoughts. And then, like lightning, understanding struck. The answer had been in front of him all along. He leapt from the tub and rushed into the lab. He realigned the copper rods and electrodes, positioning them with mathematical precision. The corpse jerked violently. For a heartbeat, Victor froze. Then the hand twitched again. Life. He fell to his knees, gasping with awe. Months later, Victor traveled across the Crimean battlefield. Around him lay the wreckage of war soldiers. He collected what he needed: strong limbs, intact organs, healthy tissue. Piece by piece, he assembled a towering form, powerful and magnificent. He prepared the experiment with precision. Then Harlander arrived unexpectedly, his face hollowed by disease. You've done it, Harlander rasped. You've built perfection. My body's failing. Place me in that vessel. Let me live again. Victor stepped back in disgust. You never understood the purpose. Their argument turned violent. In the struggle, Harlander slipped from the scaffolding and plunged to his death. Shaken but resolute, Victor returned to his table. The storm roared. Lightning crashed down through the rods, flooding the lab in blinding light. The body convulsed, then went still. Victor waited, breath held, nothing. When morning came, a faint noise stirred him awake. Slowly, Victor turned and froze. The creature was standing. Its skin glistened, its eyes, uncertain but aware, mimicking his movement. Days later, Victor chained the being deep beneath the tower, where the air smelled of iron and damp stone. Back aboard the ship, Victor paused in his retelling, staring out at the endless ice. Perhaps none of this matters, he said quietly. Captain Anderson, leaning on the railing beside him, shook his head. Maybe it doesn't, he said, but I'd still like to hear the rest. He continued. In the tower, Victor tended to the creature's wounds. It healed faster than humanly possible. He began teaching it words, gestures, meaning, but it could only manage one, Victor. When William and Elizabeth arrived, Victor eagerly presented his creation. Look at what I've done, he said proudly. It lives. Elizabeth recoiled, horrified by the sight of the chained being. This isn't life, she whispered. This is torment. Later, she returned secretly, approaching the creature with compassion. She spoke softly, teaching it her name. Elizabeth. When Victor discovered her act, rage consumed him. You will not see it again, he shouted. The next morning, when they were gone, Victor soaked the tower in fuel. Standing before the creature, he said, Say nothing, and I will spare you. The creature looked at him and spoke a single word, Elizabeth. Victor's hand trembled, then he dropped the torch. Flames leapt across the floor. The creature screamed her name as fire engulfed the tower. The explosion hurled Victor across. When he awoke, his leg was gone. Smoke filled the air. When William and Elizabeth returned hours later, all that remained were ruins and silence. Back in the present, the ship rocked gently over the ice. Captain Anderson opened the door to the deck and froze. Before him stood the creature, massive and unyielding. It grabbed the captain with one powerful hand. Victor's voice rang out. Let him go. Take me instead. The creature paused, staring at its creator. Now, it is my turn. The creature began its tale. It recounted the fire, the explosion, and its flight into the wilderness. Alone and confused, it learned to survive. It discovered a small farm, inhabited by a blind old man and his young granddaughter. Secretly, it chopped firewood, left food, and repaired fences. They named their mysterious helper the spirit of the forest. Eventually, the creature revealed itself. The old man greeted it kindly, teaching it to speak and read. The first book it studied was the story of Adam and Eve, of creation, sin, and the wrath of God. The creature returned to the ruins of the tower, seeking answers. Among the shattered remnants, it discovered Victor's notes, confirming its origin. It went back to the farm to say farewell, only to find the old man dying from injuries inflicted by wolves. The creature fought off the beasts, but the old man's life could not be saved. When the old man's family returned and saw the creature, they panicked. One struck it in the eye with a rifle and left it for dead. Yet it survived, driven by a single purpose: to find Victor. Meanwhile, Victor attended William's wedding to Elizabeth. The ceremony was a blur of candles, laughter, and music. That night, the creature appeared in Victor's room, demanding a companion, someone like itself. Victor refused. The creature's rage erupted. Elizabeth, entering the room, saw it, and instinctively, Victor fired his pistol. The bullet struck Elizabeth. She collapsed in the creature's arms, lifeless. It fled into the night, carrying her body. Victor pursued the creature into the frozen north. Exhaustion gripped him as he fired repeatedly, but the creature disarmed him. In a chilling, deliberate act, the creature's voice was gentle. "Here we are. All I can do now is live," it said softly. When Victor drew his final breath, the creature bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered his name.